Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and we really need to take some time to revisit the president's behavior in Hawaii yesterday. Let's start at the beginning. Lahaina, Maui, suffers 2 weeks ago its worst forest fire in its history, worst in America in over a century. The death toll so far is already over 100, but there are nearly 1,000 people missing, and the majority of those people are children. You see, the schools were closed, children were home, parents were at work, and the kids were trapped. They didn't know where to go, they couldn't get out. Sadly, it appears 2 weeks later that they burned. Those children are dead. But the tragedy, as it's unfolded, is so consequential that it was determined that our consoler-in-chief, our empathetic, sympathetic President Biden, remember, when he was running for president in 2020, people were saying empathy is on the ballot. Donald Trump has no empathy. We need to get back to the norms. Joe Biden, we need that man, that decent man in the White House. Well, that decent man for 2 weeks was lounging on the beach in Rehoboth, Delaware, and refused to even say anything about the Maui fires. He rode past on his bike as reporters were shouting, "Will you say anything to us about Hawaii?" He ignored them. Finally, as he was packing the car, leaving Rehoboth, Delaware, he said this.
President, any comments on the rising death toll in Maui?
Will you come talk about the Hawaii response, Mr. President?
No, he won't talk to you about the Hawaii response. No comment. Nothing to say. He got back to the White House, and within 2 days, he went off on another vacation because, who among us? He went to Lake Tahoe, and it was determined over the weekend, I guess because they took a poll or did some market testing, that it's time for Biden, 2 weeks later, to go and visit the scene. So he lands in Lahaina, and I want to remind you, as you see the images that you're about to see, you'll see burnt-out buildings behind him. Those burnt-out buildings represent homes that people were living in. They probably represent the final resting place for up to 1,000 people who are missing and children who are missing. They're probably dead. Their remains are right there behind the president, like a crematorium, like a cemetery. So here comes our consoler-in-chief, Mr. Empathy, and he starts introducing people, and he mangles their names and then starts making jokes. Take a look.
Brian Chance, our Senator Maisie. By the way, Maisie, I told my granddaughter, whose name is Maisie as well, she said, that's why I like her. Anyway, but her name is Maisie as well. And Jill Takuda, Representative Ed Chase.
Your granddaughter is named the same name as the senator, and oh, by the way, nobody gives a His granddaughter, one of them that he acknowledges, is probably the same age as one of the dead, burnt corpses laying in the earth behind him. This is disgusting. At this point, I'd love to say, if a Republican, but you know how that ends, and so why bother? Then, of course, the moment where he's let off the stage because he's dazed and confused and has no idea where he is or where he's supposed to go.
Ready? You want to grab that water for a second?
Pathetic. But I guess we're used to that by now, or we should be used to it. But I don't know if we can ever be used to the leader of the free world being led around like he's the star of Weekend at Bernie's 4. Then he starts meeting firefighters. And again, I remind you, this was an inferno. Everything's scorched. There's nothing left but ashes, including the bodies that are lying there in state. And, well, he sees a dog, and the dog has little booties on his paws, and here's what he says.
What's the boss's name? I said, how you doing, pal? Boots on too. You guys catch the boots out here? That's some hot ground, man.
That's some hot ground, man. It's the scene of an inferno. Children are dead. But honestly, that's not even the worst of it. Here is the worst of it.
I don't want to compare difficulties, but we have a little sense, Jill and I, what it's like to lose a home. Years ago, now 15 years ago, I was in Washington doing Meet the Press. It was a sunny Sunday, and lightning struck at home on a little lake that's outside of our home, not a lake, a big pond, and hit a wire and came up underneath our home into the heating ducts, the air conditioning duct. To make a long story short, I almost lost my wife, my 67 Corvette, and my cat. But all kidding aside, I watched the firefighters, the way they responded. You know, there's an old expression. I grew up right across the street from a fire hall in Claymont, Delaware.
All right, enough. That's enough. That's enough. I know exactly what you've been through. I had a fire in my house. I almost lost my home, my wife, my 67 Corvette, and my cat. He did not almost lose his home. It was a kitchen fire. The reports at the time say that it was contained within 20 minutes. He did not almost lose his wife. He didn't lose his 67 Corvette that he chuckled about there. That was a memorial service. I know exactly what you're going through. I assure you that his home was never in danger. You know how I know the fire wasn't big? Because the classified documents he kept in that home for the last 30 years were untouched. Also, he says he was doing Meet the Press that day in Washington, D.C. He heard about the fire and then went home and then tell stories about how he saw the firemen contain the fire. I assure you he did not get back to Rehoboth, Delaware, or Wilmington, Delaware, in 20 minutes from Washington, D.C. He did not see firefighters contain the fire. It was already contained. It was contained by the time he got into the car going down the elevator at Meet the Press. This is a horrible human being. Can I say once again, if a Republican, why bother? Meanwhile, later in the day, as members of clergy and family members and grieving parents were speaking at the event, President Biden finally did something dignified.
Never meant before. We are a community that relies on family, on ohana, whether by blood or by friendship.
Yeah, he fell asleep. But the good news is, while he was sleeping, he couldn't tell some made-up story about his own personal tragedy, so he could empathize with the real victims. Hey, let's take a quick look at how the Washington Post wrote up this story. Here's their lead paragraph. President Biden, First Lady Jill Biden arrived in the grief-stricken community Monday afternoon, touring damage from one of the deadliest wildfires in American history, attempting to channel one of the president's signature traits, comforting those who have lost loved ones. Needless to say, nowhere in the article is any reference to the made-up story about the tragedy of almost losing the president's 67 Corvette. And the Democrats think we've got 5 more years of this. I don't think we can endure 5 more months of this. There's more to come on O'Connor tonight. Keep it here on the Salem News Channel.